Hello, everyone. Welcome to Rolling Out Brand Creators. My name is Lerae Funderburg, and I have the lovely pleasure of being your host. And today we have Angelo Pinto. Angelo Pinto has been called one of the most brilliant minds of our time by some of today's most notable, respected leaders of the social justice movement. He is not only a critical voice in the fight for social change, but a leader who has created prolific impact, built movement institutions, and played a pivotal role in creating and elevating key movement issues. Attorney Pinto co-created a teach-in at Occupy Wall Street on the prison industrial complex, spurring a young movement around criminal justice reform, which is now a national issue. He also co-funded the Justice League NYC, which is a task force for the gathering of justice, an organization that was started by global activist and entertainer Harry Belafonte. Attorney Pinto has also lent his expertise to procuring the freedom of rapper Meek Mill and was also featured on the Hulu documentary Crime and Punishment from all of his work on that. Attorney Pinto has created the legislative campaign to raise the age of criminal responsibility in New York. I mean, he has presented and spoken widely, presenting at the United Nation in Geneva, Switzerland, at the Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. He has also been seen on a variety of TV shows, including Here and Now on ABC7, The Roland Martin Show, Changing America on MSNBC, The World News Tonight on BNC, Arise News Network, and so much more. Not only that, Attorney Pinto has been named to the Black Enterprise 40 Under 40, Ebony Magazine Power 100. He is an NAACP Image Award winner. He has received many distinguished honors. His most recent venture is as co-founder of Untitled Freedom, which is an intersectional social justice organization that was pivotal in the fight for justice for Breonna Taylor, and they were also on the ground in Minneapolis during the George Floyd uprising. So thank you so much for being here with us and gracing us with your presence here today. We are so happy to have you.
Thank you for having me. There's a lot of stuff you had to read, but thank you.
No, there's a lot. I'm like, so clearly you're a movement shaker. I mean, you wear many hats. We're talking about movement attorney, social justice educator, co-founder of Until Freedom, organizational architect, political strategist, policymaker. I mean, the list goes on, right? So, I mean, it's a lot. It's a lot. And you do all of those things under your personal brand. Like, how would you describe your brand? What does it really consist of?
Yeah, interestingly enough, I think doing the work, I never thought about like a brand. It was just like I'm doing what I love to do. I care about social justice. I care about transformative work. So it was like always doing the work and not thinking about a brand or not thinking about, certainly not a brand identity. But I think as I continued to do the work, it was something that came up a lot more frequently. The idea of, your visibility and your platform being able to be used to create more change.
Mm.
Right. And also the other thing that kind of happened was that people started to pay much more attention to social justice issues.
Mm-hmm.
So I think as those two things started to happen, in my mind, I had to pay more attention to my brand. I still don't think I pay attention to it as much as I should. It's something that I'm aspiring to do, but I realized there's like a very clear connection between your brand, the degree to which you can make impact, and the degree to which you can raise awareness around people who are paying attention and concerned about what's happening in the world around them. So that's what's kind of ushered and pushed me deep into caring about social justice issues and my brand creation.
Nice. And so, as far as you not being, I guess, super intentional about it at the outset, like what things are you looking at and doing differently now that you understand that like connection between the two?
Yeah, I think one of the big pieces is always looking at the work that I'm currently doing. I still look at things from a work impact first approach. So
Mhm.
it's always looking at what can have the greatest impact, what could create the most change. And then once that's identified, the question is, how can you share this information? How can you share this work with the world?
Mm.
How do you use this work to talk about what you do, right? To create more momentum and more traction around creating change. So for me now, they kind of work together. It's like identifying the best place to strike
Mhm.
and striking in a way that elevates the issue, elevates the platform, and creates more momentum. So some of that is about kind of the elevation, amplification, and kind of expansion of my own voice and brand on these issues. So for me, that's where the synergy happens. It's like it shouldn't just be an issue that you raise here for the moment and forget about it, but how do you really give it legs? How do you create a movement behind it? And part of the way you do it is by making yourself identifiable as someone people can go to learn about issues, talk about issues, and create a dialogue with.
And so how has that really worked out for you,
Mm,
like in doing all of that? Like what has been like the benefits or I guess like the backlash or any of that?
both. It's changed my life for
Okay.
sure because it's changed how I thought about the work.
Mhm.
Because I was definitely one of those individuals who thought about movement work from a very non-visibility perspective. It was like, I'm just doing the work. And there's a lot of folks who talk about the work in that way. Like, we're just doing the work. We're not caring about how much visibility the work gets, if 100 people know about it, 5 people, 10,000. And then for me, one of the things that I always was concerned about or cared about was that I didn't want to just do the work, but I wanted to have the greatest impact.
Mm.
So for me, what became kind of very clearly apparent was like the more impact is going to be connected to the degree to which you can make an issue visible, the
Mhm.
degree to which you can bring people into the conversation, the degree to which you can raise broad awareness. So for me, I've started to realize that more and more. And once I realize that that helps you create more impact, for me, it's like it's a no-brainer. That's what I'm going to do. I think for a lot of folks, and I haven't experienced it as much, I've experienced it here and there, but a lot of folks experience backlash. I
Mm.
think the more people disconnect or people don't like to see people who are social justice activists, organizers, attorneys as having big platforms, as
Mm.
being influencers. I think when people see that, they automatically start to equate that with someone who prioritizes that.
Yes.
And people have a big, I think, issue and narratives around clout chasers. So people assume that you're just doing that for clout. But most of the folks who I work with and the folks that I'm connected with have been doing this years before it became a thing. And really, it was the work that gave them visibility, and it was the work that created the platform, not the other way around. But people get a lot of backlash for it because I think a lot of people unfortunately think that the people who do this work should not have visibility and the people who do this work should be broke.
Mm.
So I think
Okay.
there are a lot of narratives around what it means to be an authentic leader, to be an authentic social justice activist and advocate. So it's created a lot of controversy, but I think a lot of the conversation is being shifted in this moment. So I think every generation, every time there's a big moment, we get to recreate or create what it looks like. And we're in the moment. People always talk about this is not your grandmother's civil rights movement,
Yeah.
right? So the movement looks different. The people in the movement look different. The way we do the work is different. And with difference comes backlash. So I think it comes with the territory. Unfortunately, I think for some, it creates a lot of turmoil and trauma. And I think for the folks who do this work, we want to minimize and mitigate that, but you can't get rid of it completely. And some of that is just kind of par for the course.
How do you personally like navigate through all of that? Because I'm like, I'm sure it could be a lot. You know what I mean? You're in the spotlight, you're having to deal with all of this backlash, and like you're true to yourself to the core. Like, this is what I do, and I've always set out to do. So, like, how do you navigate through all of,
Yeah.
the hate, really?
Don't read the comments. So I think seriously though, like I tell people that all the time, like don't read the comments. And for me, what that really means is don't listen to the naysayers,
Mhm.
right? I think the comments are usually filled with naysayers. There's people who are saying great things, but when you start to dive in too much, you're getting too granular, and that's a dangerous place to be. So I think that's something that people have to stay away from. Stay away from diving deep into details and comments, because I think that's also where people begin to internalize things.
Mm.
The other piece that's important is really what you said. You got to know who you are. You got to know that you do the work from a place of integrity. You do the work because you care about the work. You did the work before the work was a big thing everyone was talking about. And I think when you know yourself, it doesn't mean that what people say doesn't hurt,
Mhm.
but it doesn't stifle you. It doesn't throw you off the course. It doesn't make you, want to reconsider everything. It might make you take a step back. It might make you pause and rethink why you do what you do, but it allows you to keep moving forward. So I think those are the two really big pieces. Like, don't get into the comments, which really means don't get into the weeds, and really be clear about who you are and why you do the work. The thing I say to people all the time is the history of this kind of work has always been met with repression. It was oftentimes from the government, who was trying to quiet and silence leadership voices around any progressive movement in this country. And today it's no different. It's not always coming from the government, but sometimes it's coming from other people in positions of power who don't want to see this kind of change. So some of it really comes with the territory. Like, if this is the work, some of the backlash is going to come in this form. It doesn't make it easier, but I think sometimes also being aware of the history of the work allows you to understand that this is natural, and then develop a strategy to confront it, even if it's an individual strategy and not necessarily an organization or movement strategy. Because the other challenge is that it's very hard to get everyone on the same page.
Right.
It's very hard to get everyone to think the same way. So sometimes you have to really start with yourself and the folks next to you, and really press to make an impact there.
No, so I love that. And so as far as like individual, right? So you said it's separate from the organization, and you have to like tackle it kind of as an individual. Like, so you personally, like, I know you said don't look at the comments. That's one thing.
Right.
That's one thing for sure. But are there any other like tactics and strategies that you use to kind of just keep yourself grounded and like away from the naysayers, and just keep you in a place of like integrity, and just knowing that this is what you're doing? Is there anything else?
My theory, and the thing I try to do, I have this theory that if you elevate, a lot of things can no longer reach you.
Mm.
So for me, the answer is always elevation, right? You have to elevate the way you think about things, right? So that stops you from reading certain things. And I think you have to elevate how you see yourself. You have to elevate your position in the world to know that you're going to receive certain attacks because of that. And I think certain other attacks will stop with elevation, but a new set of attacks will emerge. So I think elevation for me really keeps you away from certain kind of energy,
Mm.
keeps you away from certain attacks, and it keeps you looking up,
Mhm.
right? It keeps you looking up in a way that prevents you from getting into every spat that could arise when you're looking down and you're looking at eye level with folks. Sometimes you got to see beyond and see above what's in front of you. So for me, some of it is really a way of being, right?
Mhm.
It's a way of living. And it's also comes with, for me, part of what that means is like you don't take things personal.
Mm.
You don't allow everything to penetrate your armor. Most things are not directed towards you, and they're not even about you if they are. So creating kind of a lifestyle and a way of seeing the world that allows you to navigate those things and not be pulled down and pulled into every confrontation with whatever comes your way. So for me, it's always elevation. It's always looking up. It's always looking forward and finding healthy and constructive ways to engage the things you decide to engage with. Sometimes you can engage a conflict, right? But I think you have to engage it on your terms, right? And you have to engage it from a place where you're very grounded and clear about your objectives and what you want the outcome to be. So a lot of it is really being centered in yourself and how you approach things. And the deep thing about it is, right, when you do movement work and social justice work, we often get trained in how you approach this work. Like a lot of our work or our theory of change comes from Kingian nonviolence, right? So Dr. King and other folks who took a nonviolent approach were trained,
Mhm.
right? And one of the first principles was suspend your first judgment, right? Because they said, if you're doing Kingian nonviolence and someone engages you and is trying to provoke you, they're going to do things to provoke you.
Mhm.
But you kind of have to have this steadfast, focused, grounded perspective to not be moved by everything that comes your way, to be able to move strategically in the heat of the moment. So a lot of our training, if we're able to follow it and apply it in our personal life, is really the best thing. When I do movement work, I always say to people, if you haven't transformed your inner self, you can't transform society,
Mm.
right? So they work hand in hand. The society and world we want to see, you have to exhibit that. You have to display that. You have to have the character that can create that. Now, that's a lot easier said than done. But I think even if you could use some of those principles and make them central in your life, it really transforms your personal experience in the movement, but it also transforms the movement at large.
Oh, I love that. So as far as your personal experience when it comes to all of these things, is it basically just all on social media that you're receiving the backlash, or are you receiving it in other places? And how do you navigate it in that atmosphere?
Sometimes it happens in person, you know?
Really?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Which I think is even more challenging because it's like, sometimes those things, they blindside you, right? You might be at an event or someplace and you're not thinking something's going to happen, and someone might recognize you or your work and they have an opinion about it. They have a perspective about it. And sometimes those opinions and perspectives can be traumatizing. They can be aggressive. And on one hand, that's what security is for, because you have to very seriously. Like there's people
Right.
who, I mean, one of the things that comes with this work is death threats. People get them, you know. And sometimes it's coming from the opposition, but sometimes people who we would not think are our opposition oppose components of what we do, how we do it. So you really have to have a game plan, not only for, I think in some ways the social media piece can be the easiest. Like if you're actually confronted in the street by folks, and you're not prepared, you don't have security, you don't know how to approach it, it could be very testing of a person's willpower. And everyone doesn't believe in nonviolence. So, I mean, there's a lot of dynamics and challenges with a confrontation about the work you do, right? Because the other piece where there's a huge disconnect, and I know this because you work with people who people look at and have perspectives upon, is that people are real people, right?
Right.
They're regular people who have visibility, who might have a large platform, but they're regular people who have regular concerns, who live somewhat regular lives, and in some ways are trying to figure life out on their own terms too, right? They might be exceptional, great in one area, but they're regular people trying to live a life, a healthy life, a productive life. And I think sometimes people lose sight of that. And you start to look at individuals as an influencer, or you look at an individual as, this thing that isn't the complete truth. And I
Mhm.
think that's really challenging. And I think I used to do that,
Mhm.
right? And I used to look at people as what you perceive them to be, not who they really are. But I think when you become that
Yeah.
and people start to look at you, or you're next to people who are that, your perspective changes quickly. And
Mhm.
I've had so many conversations saying to people who brought things to my attention about myself or people I know, I'm like, that's my friend. Like, you can't talk about my friend like that.
Yeah.
I'm like, you can have a perspective and you can share that with me, but this person is actually my friend first.
Right.
They
Right.
do this work too, but they're my friend and they're a human being who deserves to be honored. So I
Mhm.
think there's a lot of disconnects. And sometimes you got to bring that home to people when you talk to them. Sometimes it doesn't change because people will be bugging,
Yeah.
but you still got to bring it to that point. I think sometimes that could create a centered place from which you can have a dialogue, not always. Some people you just can't talk to them. They're so stuck on where they're thinking. And some people, unfortunately, in this work are dangerous.
Mm.
So there's people who, leaders throughout the course of history have been targeted in all kinds of violent ways. So you have to be mindful of that. You got to really, I think, in many ways, be prepared for what's to come to the degree you can. And then in some degree, you kind of have to leave things to faith because you don't know what's going to happen in every encounter. You don't know what's to come. And I think that for some people is the scary part.
And so, how does that affect you with as far as like pursuing your brand, right? So, knowing that there's that threat of like, hey, I'm in this position, I'm a target, at this point, because of all the things that I do, all the things that I stand for, all the work that I'm putting into everything. Like, how does that affect how you really brand yourself or don't?
You know, I think I always knew that was going to happen. It was
Okay.
like, if you do this work, someone might come for your head,
Uh,
right? Or I think sometimes even just having a radical or progressive position, people who are somewhat aligned with you might not want to be close to you,
mm,
right? So it's not just the people who are your direct opposition,
mhm,
right? I've learned that being in the political world, like there's all kinds of folks who might have it out for you for a variety of reasons. And you don't know that, like early on in your career, you'll never know that because you're just too green, I guess. And you
mhm,
think the world is a nicer place than it is sometimes. And the world's a nice place. But there could be challenging dimensions of it, and you may not see all those things. You don't have the vision and experience to know what's to come. But I think I've always known that that was a part of the game.
mhm,
And in some ways, you embrace it. I think for me, it's like, this is what's going to come. Good. When some of this comes, I know I'm doing the work. But I think also the older and more mature you get, and when you have children and family, you think about that. Like you think about, could this impact somebody who's close to me who didn't sign up for this? Right? That's the thing where I think it becomes dangerous, where you have to be more thoughtful about kind of that impact, because no one wants to see that.
right.
You don't want to see that. You know.
Yeah, so you brought up, that, you're a parent, right? And there are other people around you. So how much of yourself, I guess, like as a father or a partner or a friend, or you personally as who you are, outside of your work is like reflected or incorporated into like your personal brand? Is that something that you kind of bring to the forefront at all, especially knowing all the, risks that are at stake with the work that you're doing, or how does that work for you?
I think there's no way around it. I think for me, the more comfortable you get being who you are, the more easy it is to deal with what may come. And I think the other part of it is like, as much as you do want to protect the people who are close to you, who are around you, who may not have signed up for it, there is a way in which you can't completely stop everything,
Mm,
right? And folks will have to deal with questions. Folks will have to figure things out. It's just like me, people who I work with, right? You're connected to them.
mhm,
They're an extension of you in a way, and you can't escape what comes with that. So it's better to just be clear about it,
mhm,
and be prepared to deal with it. I think, people always have the option and the opportunity to flee, to run, to pretend like something doesn't exist.
mhm,
But at some point you have to confront it. And I think the best piece of advice is don't run, confront.
mm,
And you get to decide what confrontation looks like, right? Confrontation doesn't have to be aggressive. It doesn't have to be violent. It doesn't have to be chaotic. it can be very thoughtful, very grounded, very well intentioned. And one thing that I've learned is most people's concerns are coming from a good place.
Mm,
There is a segment of the population that that's not true,
mhm,
and concerns are very personally motivated, and sometimes they're even sinister. But I think for most folks, they're really concerned. A lot of people care about the issues and they want to see the work happen in a thoughtful and integral way.
mhm,
Um, Now, I think what people miss is that certain folks who have high visibility are bombarded by individuals' thoughts, concerns, and I think we should do this, and can we figure? And it's like at some point that alone will burn you out.
right, right.
So I think there's just a lot of dynamics that people aren't able to wrap their head around because they're not in that position.
Mhm,
Right, just like any job, you may not know what it feels like to be a sanitation worker because you don't pick up trash, right?
right.
And there are some things that come along with the job that are very trying. So for me, I really like to believe that most people really care and most people want to do something right. They want to help, they want to assist, but they may not know the best way to do it. And their criticisms and their concern probably comes from a good place. And for me, the best response or the best answer you can ever give folks like that is like, we don't know.
Mm,
Sometimes we get it wrong. Like
yeah,
we're
yeah.
figuring it out too. We're trying to do the work in an integral way. And sometimes we fall short. Sometimes we miss things. Sometimes we could have strategized better. And that's always what you're aspiring to do. You want to do the work in the most thoughtful, integral, impactful way. But you have to be willing and able at the same time to say, I failed.
Mm,
I fell short. I didn't achieve that.
right.
And I think sometimes people think things are so calculated that people did that on purpose, if that
Mm,
makes sense. Like I failed on purpose. I put something in motion that I knew wasn't going to bring the outcome that it should have. And most people who are doing the work are not doing it from that sinister place.
mhm,
It's really coming from a place of maybe you failed, maybe you did something that could have been done better. You're it's a flaw, it's a challenge, you struggled, you had trouble. And I think the more people see that and create grace for that, the more the work can actually happen, and people won't have to kind of do the work and fight off attacks
yeah.
of how people view them doing the work, because that's a whole nother job in and of itself.
Absolutely. So authenticity and transparency is like a huge part of your brand, then basically is what I'm hearing.
I think that's exactly, I think if you're doing the work, it has to be,
Okay.
right? Because the like I said before, the work comes first,
Mm,
right? The work comes first, the impact comes first. And I think for most people, I know myself and folks who I'm close to, many folks were doing the work for free for a long time.
mm,
They were doing the work or they weren't getting paid much. They were just getting by. They were
right,
just making it because they cared about the work that much.
right.
They were authentic to it. People literally were not thinking about finances. I
Mhm.
think it's with maturity that people start to say, hold on, wait, I actually have to survive while I do
Hello.
this work. And it's
Hello.
not a bad thing to
Right,
survive while I do the work.
right.
And I think for some people, that's a new place that's emerging with the movement. But in terms of for me, when I see visible movement folks or movement organizations with brands,
Mhm.
the ones that are for me the most impactful and the ones that resonate most with people, they lead with authenticity.
All
They
right.
lead with integrity. And that usually comes from being tapped into the things that people already want. You got to be tapped into the desires of the people, the things people want to see change. And if you lead from that authentic place, even if you don't win, even if you don't get it done, people are going to rally behind you and be with you regardless.
Absolutely. So with you being a like part of an organization, right? How do you separate your brand as like Angelo Pinto, all of the things that you do, separate from, co-founder of Until Freedom?
Yeah. I think it's interconnected, right? Like I think the organization came together with the goal of bringing people who had different skill sets together.
Mhm.
people who did different things great, right? And when you put all that together, you create an organization that can have much more impact than the individual would have.
Mm.
So for me, being an attorney, working on policy, my charge and the thing that I've thought most about is how do you elevate these things, which sometimes can be things people don't like to think about, which sometimes can be things that an expert needs to talk about, an expert needs to know, someone who's been educated on a particular issue can talk about. How do you make those things commonplace?
Mhm.
How do you talk about them and share them in a way that it doesn't require an expert to know? A child could understand it and you can talk about it. So I think for me, a lot of my thought process now is around that. How do you take complex ideas, complex strategies for change, complex legal theories or policy programs and make them, table talk conversations that anyone could relate to, anyone could have a conversation with. Because I think for me, it's like, how do you bring people into that conversation?
Mhm.
Because I think the other challenge is that some of the issues could just be flashpoints, if that
Mm.
makes sense. It's like people hear about, oh my God, that's a big deal. And then like, how do you take it from being just a big deal to putting some meat on it that creates impact?
Mm.
Right? Because
Mm.
I think we're the way the media is set up, social media and just the media cycle, it's easy to have big flashpoints that grab people's attention, that people are pulled in, but it's not always easy to take that, pull it out, talk about it, create change with it. So
Mm.
for me, that's the thing I'm most intentional about and I think about often. It's like, how do I not just create a flashpoint, but how do you utilize a flashpoint
Mhm.
to pull people in, raise awareness, pull people in, create change?
Mm.
And for me, that's really the strategy. Because I mean, I think the flashpoint, the moment tells you a lot, right? It tells you kind of back to what I was saying, what the pulse of the people are, right? This is something people care about. This is something people are thinking about. This is something people want to do something about. How do you create the space and opportunity for people to do that? For me, that is the role of organizers, right? It's to see people are concerned, create a space, a venue, and an opportunity and a lane for them to be engaged and do something about it. And for me, the other piece is we fail as organizations, we fail in our branding of the work when we don't do that. And I
Mm.
think that happens sometimes. Sometimes we moments happen and they're not leveraged to the degree that they could to create the kind of change that they should.
Mm. Whew, I'm like, you done gave us a word here tonight. So I'm just curious as far as you and your personal brand. Like, what can we expect to see from you, like moving forward in the near future?
Yeah, I think the work has made me think about a lot of things in this political moment. One of the things it's made me think a lot about is children,
Mm-hmm.
and young people who I've seen across the country get active, and some young people who are on the front lines of social media, social justice causes, the front lines of marches. And one of the things that's really in my heart is what I'm referring to as social justice education,
Mm.
right? And how do you use social justice as a tool, not only for educating young people about history, but also what's happening in the moment, but how do you use those same skill sets to transform young people in with regards to their character and who they are and what they bring to the world and their gifts. So for me, a big piece of where I see myself going is around that's the use of social justice education as a liberatory and transformative tool for young people. Um, I also see myself diving deeper into the work with attorneys and their role in this movement. I think historically, when I think about the civil rights movement, people talk about Dr. King, but people are also, talk about Thurgood Marshall, and they talk about the attorneys who played a significant role in, what King was doing and what other folks in the civil rights movement were doing. And you saw, I think, Black attorneys brown attorneys at the forefront of those issues. I think when I think about the movement now, I don't feel like the same energy and the same scope and depth of Black legal leadership exists. I
Mm,
think you see folks here and there, and I think there are some folks who stand out nationally when you talk about the work. But
mhm,
for me, we haven't built an army,
mm,
right? An army of Black, brown, and progressive attorneys who are recognizing the issues, being deployed into the communities, and creating change using legal tools, right?
mhm,
I think it's usually, again, it goes back to this idea, it's usually a flashpoint.
mhm.
We haven't built the kind of system around kind of the legal apparatus and our legal resources in the way that I believe we can. And because of it, I think the movement suffers.
Mm,
Because a lot of the work, while it is frontline organizing, while it has to be people being in the street, caring about the issue, at some point there is usually a legal or political component,
yeah,
right? And not only is there usually a legal or political component, those are the things that have staying power,
right.
right? So when you pass legislation, you now set something in motion for decades or generations to come.
Mhm,
When you have a case set precedent, you have set something in motion for generations and decades to come. And for me, that is something, when I think about the movement, I think about my place in it, and I think about the history of, I mean, there's a long history of great legal minds who gave their life in a variety of ways to the movement. For
mhm,
me, I think a part of my work and my brand is to carry on that tradition for myself. But what I'm seeing more today than ever is also creating space for the attorneys who are coming behind me.
mm,
There are a lot of young folks who, not enough, but there's a lot of young folks who are going to law school who are also tapped in deeply with the social moment and are trying to figure out the ways in which they can be engaged, the ways in which they can use their voice, the ways in which they can use their law degrees. And truth be told, oftentimes there's not a lot of opportunities.
right.
There are people who ask, how do you do this work? How did you get to do this work?
Yeah.
And I'm just like, wow. So part of what one of my goals now, I think of being in the work for, I haven't been in the work forever, but being in the work for a significant amount of time is how do you create opportunities for the folks coming behind you to do the work in a way that's unhampered? Because for me, you know, I had to learn the hard way.
Yeah.
And oftentimes it was, learning the ropes of social justice movements, learning the ropes of nonprofit organizations and all that that comes with. And now that some of us have kind of learned the ropes, I think it's our job to not have all the folks who come behind us learn in the same way.
Mm,
So we have a huge responsibility there. And I think for me, that's a part of the work, right? So educating all of the young people who may or may not go into the legal profession around social justice and the impact it can have on them. I think it's critical and should be critical for any education, for any curriculum that exists. And then also the hardcore, the centralized legal piece of preparing, I think, the next generations of legal minds and legal army.
yes. Yes. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for all of this. I mean, this has been magnificent. Tell the people how they can reach you.
So I can be reached on Instagram at Angelo Pinto ESQ. I could also be reached on Twitter at Angelo Pinto 720. I could be found, and the organization can be found at untildfreedom.com. And hopefully, this story, folks will be able to see a link or follow us there as well.
And tap in for sure. Well, I appreciate you so much for spending this time with us and sharing all that you shared with our audience today. It has definitely been a valuable experience and just learning about your brand and all of the things that you do. And so we appreciate you for sure. Yes.
Thank you for having me. And I look forward to talking to you in the audience again.
Okay, absolutely. Bye.